Good evening and welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science, of course. Tonight's topic is What About Sealants with our special guests, Sharon, Libby, and Bill Robinson. My name is Mike, and I am drinking tonight an alter ego from Treehouse Brewing. It's an IPA. My friend Bob Morrison brought up for me. He might be tuning in tonight. It's a good IPA. At the BS and Beer Show, we like to encourage local groups. We started as a local building science discussion group, and there's a bunch now around the U.S. and one in Australia, currently on hold. But Greg O'Barron is in the audience. He's running the Australia one, and we encourage you to start your own. And we would also like to thank our media partners, Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building Magazine. And I will turn it over to Emily to talk about the mechanics of the show.
Hey guys, Emily Mottram, architect here in Maine. Tonight I am having a Chianti from Italy. I mentioned last week switching over to the wines because it's cold in my basement office, so gonna stick with those, although almost had bourbon, Mason. Almost. This close. The agenda for tonight is we're going to do an introduction of our guests. Then we're going to have a panel discussion and presentation by them. Then we're going to invite the audience to join us. And then we will end at 7:30. So type your comment in the chat box as we go along. Questions, comments, we'll try to get to them towards the end of the show or in the middle if it's prevalent to what we're talking about. The video recording for tonight will be up usually by Monday of next week on Green Building Advisor, and we encourage you to continue the conversation over on Green Building Advisor if you have more things to comment tonight about sealants after we get done talking. So off to Kylie for announcements.
Right. Announcements include the Midwest Builders Symposium, which is taking place on September 16th, the Fine Home Building Summit, which is October 26th through 29th, Nessie's Building Energy New York Conference from September 23rd to the 24th, and our book club, our inaugural book club of New Carbon Architecture by Bruce King on September 24th when he will join the show. The Passive House training with Kramer Silkworth is happening September 14th through 18th, and Kramer's a frequent attendee. Maybe he's here tonight. He's also responsible for training both Emily and Mike as Passive House consultants, so that's fun. And if you enjoy this show, you might also appreciate the Passive House Accelerators Global Happy Hour. I love that title. On Wednesdays, and BS Fridays with Dave Cooper and Mark Willey. And Emily made that point. So I did post links to all of those events early on when I first came on. So it'll be at the top of the chat box if you're interested in those. And I think it's time for introduction of guests.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm Travis. I'm in Kansas City. I'm drinking a Boulevard Bob's 47, or I will be as soon as I find my bottle opener. Set my keys down when I came in and got right down to business, and now be dry-mouthed. Anyway, enough about me. You guys tuned in for our guests. I'll start with Sharon Libby of Walsh Construction. Sharon joined Walsh in 2013 and has over a decade of experience in the architecture and construction industries. As Walsh Quality Director, she is responsible for the implementation of quality assurance and quality control procedures. In the pre-construction phase of a project, Sharon reviews the drawings and specifications in progress and advises the project team on quality and constructability issues. During construction, Sharon oversees installation procedures and envelope coordination activities and conducts construction reviews with the craftspeople responsible for execution to ensure a high-quality project. Sharon, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you're drinking or what you're hiding in your bio. There's got to be some dirty details from your life that now would be the best time to share that.
Well, not to start out with a little Debbie Downer, but it's quite hot here on the West Coast, at least for us. And so I'm staying hydrated and trying to keep my respiratory system clear. So I may crack again. I have a Kona waiting for me here after the presentation, but I'm going to try to stay on point for 15 minutes at least.
Every once in a while, sobriety is advisable, and so I applaud your restraint. Our other guest, or our next guest, I don't want you to sound like your leftovers, Bill. Our Our second guest is Bill Robinson. Bill's doing his second stint in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. First time around, Bill worked as an oil field diver on all 3 U.S. coasts, the North Sea, both coasts of South America, and New Zealand. The most recent time, he's working in the water world as a building envelope consultant, with water once again as his focus. While growing up in Indiana, Bill's family was in the construction business, building churches, grain elevators, and even homes. He began lifting, digging, and carrying to learn from the ground up. In between, Bill was a general contractor in California, where it quickly became obvious there was a huge training gap. This started him on a path to deliver relevant building practices to the individuals in the dirt, with the thought that well-trained technicians could build better homes. Now his focus is to work with manufacturers, builders, and homeowners to make homes durable, efficient, and healthy. Since returning to Louisiana, Bill has worked with LSU's Ag Center as a building science educator part-time, and then he roams the countryside in the hot, humid South to find the red marbles and eliminate them. In the process, Bill's written articles for the Journal of Light Construction, Fine Home Building, and several other publications. And Bill has worked on the show floor of the International Builder Show, the Remodeling Show, JLC Live, and others. You can still see some of Bill's work at the link www.train2build.com. That's train, the number 2, build.com. And he's got links there to his Instagram and YouTube stuff. So at this time, we'd like Bill to introduce himself. And of course, I really want to know about these red marbles. What are you talking about, Bill?
Well, what's left to say, I guess, after that? Thank you. Okay, so anyway, first of all, I'm drinking a Topo Chico with a little twist of lime.
Hey, that's my
all,
drink.
Cool. That's all I'm allowed. There's a story behind that. So the red marbles, I'll try to make it really quick. W. Edwards Deming, who was a quality control person that went over to Japan, started their quality program. One of the trainings he used to do was to show people how to do better management. And so he would bring 5 managers up on a stage, on a platform, and he would show them how to make white marbles, right? And so what he'd give them the tools, he'd give them a box of marbles, he'd give them a scoop and a training, which was scoop and dip, right? Scoop and dip. The box of marbles had 3,000 white marbles and 2,000 red marbles in it. So the whole point about the thing was we take out the red marbles before we start production. And I think that's really, that's what works for me. What are the things that we look at our plans and our processes and our projects that are already going to cause a problem? Let's get them out in the beginning. So that is the red marbles.
That makes sense. I appreciate you clarifying that for me. I might not have found that otherwise. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. And I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and, oh, I'm sorry, Mike, I stepped on you.
No, please
Our
go
good
ahead.
friend, Mike Maines, please, by all means, introduce yourself.
No,
Oh.
no, it's all good. No, I think we're going to turn it over to Sharon, I think, for a presentation.
All right, sounds great. I'm going to hit the green button here and hope everything works just fine. All right, does that look right on your guys' end?
Yes.
All right, sounds good. Let me move a few things around here and we'll be good to go. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. I'm the quality director for Walsh Construction, and just a little background. Walsh operates in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington, and we primarily build multifamily commercial projects for mission-driven nonprofits, low-income, homeless, disabled, student and housing organizations. And we are proud to maintain a base who come to their buildings for the long term and are looking for dual energy efficient and cost-effective buildings. And I think this is important to mention as it provides a glimpse into the motivation for at least our obsession over quality and durability in our process and execution and building. We feel sealants can play a huge role in achieving those goals of durability and performance for our clients. And today I hope to share with you why we do that and how we help to ensure sealants really live up to their expectations. So in 2013, Walsh hired me fresh off of struggling through a recession in the architectural profession. I wasn't sure working with he was going to lead me, but I am grateful to have a mentor to point me in the right direction. This is Martin Houston, who I'm sure several of you know from summer camp. And he really showed me the ropes on many topics. And with sealants, I was tasked with doing a study which turned into a very large study to gain an in-depth understanding. And I first learned why sealants are important and where they are used. And sealants are pretty much used in every control layer. And here in the Pacific Northwest, we have kind of our own brand of things, as I'm sure you all know. But our primary use of sealants is at the cladding or bulk water shedding surface and at the WRB and air barrier control layers. And sealants provide that continuity that is so important in designing and constructing the control layers and addressing any discontinuities in penetrations, transitions, and terminations. And in cladding, we are looking to keep that bulk water out, and cladding seals can be located at transitions such as these, like the storefront to concrete transition or windows to siding. And sealants are also used to make the WRB and air barrier control layers continuous. On the left is the through-wall flashing detail that we see a lot on our projects, where the air control layer needs to be continuous while the WRB laps over the metal flashing. And then on the right, an interior air seal at a window perimeter. And at penetrations as well, sealants are used to make both the air control and the WRB layers continuous, where this exhaust penetration terminates and penetrates the wall. And in setting up our sealant study, we needed to determine what exactly we were going to test. What properties are most important to performance? And adhesion is obviously a big one. Sealants need to stick to their intended substrates in order to provide continuity. And we had seen failures in the field before, like here on the left. And so it needed to be understood what failures might look like in a test, as well as the factors such as time and exposure that are more difficult to incorporate into a simple pull test. And compatibility is also an important factor, since a negative chemical reaction between materials in contact could cause them not to perform how they were intended, and not just for the sealants. It's again important to understand how a chemical incompatibility could look in the field, like on the right, versus a test on the left, and what the factors are to leading to that more dramatic result. And it could be UV, it could be some other exposure, just the fact that there's way more of the material in contact with each other. And we to test materials, sealants, and substrates that were not only designed to be in contact, but could be in contact due to proximity and installation. And this is where we kind of turn to lessons learned. So this is an example of chemical incompatibility that we had on a project where bedding sealant was called for behind the window flange. It squished out during the window install and in contact with the asphalt vac-sam using the post wrap. These materials were obviously not performing as intended. They're melting off us. And so we had to remove all of these materials and replacing them. We did so without that bedding seal to avoid that chemical incompatibility. And for those materials designed to be in contact, we looked at project examples of what to include in the study. And it was a good process to see both the detailed version and the field installation and how they might actually differ. And this is a good example of showing the designed and installed versions of an interior air seal at a strap anchor window. And you can see in the left, the design is very clear and clean. However, in the real world application, that strap anchor made our air seal discontinuous. So we need to make sure that we got around the strap anchor, in front of it and behind it, so that our air seal is actually continuous. Then we also looked to some common testing standards to gain an understanding of what properties are commonly being tested in the field. So ASTM 1521 is a good one that outlines adhesion testing of in-service joints. And in our project specifications, pre-construction testing is typically required, and we were already doing some pre-con tests, including field adhesion on project-specific materials. And this is typically a sealant, single sealant to substrate trust, as shown in the photo here, with the interior air seal sealant and the cladding both being tested to a section of a vinyl window. And this really modeled this type of testing pretty closely with many, many different. So we set out some goals for our study. So observe and compare sealants and substrates, test recommended in inadvertent applications, gain an understanding of sealant and substrate chemistry in relation to the expected in-field performance, measure adhesion and record modes of failure, compare the results in a quantitative way and qualitative. So the full study from 2013 is posted on our walshconstruction.com website. And so I'm going to kind of fly through a lot of the results that I'm sure everyone's going to be dying to look more in detail at. But I wanted to go over our process and also note that we had some great contributors from suppliers, manufacturers, and installers. They all proved to be wonderful resources, not only for providing materials to test, but also for their expertise and willingness to engage in our experiment. And to be clear, the study did not follow any particular ASTM, and the results don't replace field testing with project-specific materials that is so important on every job. We took all of the ideas for sealant to substrate pairings from design specifications, manufacturers' recommendations, field experience, etc., and organized them into a test pairing matrix to record our results. Substrates included a wide array of membranes from mechanically attached, self-adhesive, liquid, as well as various sealant types and cladding types and window frames. And then the sealants were broken up by their listed chemistries. So silicone, SCPE, polyurethane, and then there was a catch-all category for those manufacturers that didn't really want to reveal their chemistry and only listed that generic term of elastomeric polymer as the chemistry. So, as I said, a wide array of sealants were used in the test, and these were the specific ones that we did test. And then as well as membranes and claddings, you can see there. The test boards were set up with the membranes substrates in 2 rows, and then with 3 beads of the various sealants organized like this. 3 beads were intended for different pool tests, one at 7-day cure, one at 14-day cure, and a third to be a demo pool for some in-house training we did after the study concluded. And this is Randy McAdams with Atlas Supply. He helped tremendously with the study. It provided some warehouse space and lots of material. Here you can see how the test boards were set up. The one longer bead was to ensure we got some edge contact with the various membranes so we could observe any reactions or chemical compatibility issues with that back side of the membrane. And we used primer were recommended by the manufacturer, and typically also set up a control without primer as well so we could compare. And we tooled the sealant beads to gain proper adhesion as noted in just about every manufacturer installation instruction. Here's a few more examples of the WRB and SAM test boards and various liquid applied membrane boards. And the cladding samples were also set up with multiple test beads. Here's a brick sample that an installer made up for us, and some window frames that we had donated by a manufacturer. And we wanted a way to measure adhesion that would be more consistent than just a single hand pull test. So this small scale was improved with some grips and a bond breaker tape, so we're measuring adhesion and not just stickiness. We measured the pull failure on a scale of 0 to 11 pounds, the limit of our scale. And obviously an 11-pound pull strength is definitely not needed for a typical cladding or air seal sealant, but this was our way to gain comparative results. And the different failure modes were recorded: adhesive, cohesive, substrate, and then we added a special liquid applied failure one for any liquid applied that then just peeled up from the substrate. And it's really meant to just be comparative, not for precise or structural analysis. The results of the 7- and 14-day pull tests were recorded on our matrix, and we analyzed them in a couple of ways. You can see with the green, yellow, red, the chart shows where the pull strengths were noted as increased, decreased, or no change, and this is for the SAMs. And here are for the WRBs, and for the claddings. And then we also compared pull strength results using some color coding, which was interesting to look at as the substrate types and sealant chemistries were grouped in the matrix. This really showed us some trends, and we were able to identify those trends. And you can see in the charts where the higher pull strengths are clustered by the darker colors and the weaker ones by the lighter boxes. And again, keep in mind, you don't really need an 11-pound pull strength test for an air barrier, but it gives you a good idea of what's sticking and what's not. And then this is for another round of SAMs and WRBs. And yeah. So at the end of the study, all of our pull test data as well as our observations brought us to several conclusions. So recommended cure times are dependent on a sealant's exposure to the proper environment for curing. And I'm sure most of you have probably noticed that the cure times listed in a product data sheet say 70 degrees and 50% humidity. And we don't hit that very often in Oregon and Washington, and definitely not on a consistent basis. So if you're a little cooler, a little warmer, your cure times can certainly change. And then we saw adhesion of sealants to substrates can change over time. The study did not test single variables. We were in a warehouse, but it wasn't completely climate controlled. And again, we didn't really want that. We wanted a little bit more real world. And we were limiting a few factors, although not completely lab test quality. So, and then we noticed that similars in basic chemistry between sealants and substrates aided in adhesion. And this is a good example of two different, we have a polyurethane sealant and a silicone sealant, both on a liquid applied silicone membrane. And you can see the polyurethane failed adhesively 0.0, it says there. So it was really just kind of falling off the board. And the silicone one really adhered tenaciously. This was not without exception, but it was a pretty good rule of thumb to note. And coatings and primers have important effects on adhesion. In general, primers helped adhesion. And actually with this one that we're seeing here, it failed adhesively at 10 pounds, which is quite a bit, but it actually pulled the primer right off of the siding board. And then that mystery group of sealants called elastomeric polymers, they tended to exhibit reduced adhesion in comparison to the other groups, and they also had some compatibility issues, reactions with some sandbackings, off-gassing, and shrinkage, which you can see in this picture by the wrinkled membrane. Adhesion to the mechanically attached WRBs was significantly less than the permeable liquid applieds, but manufacturer and project required performance should certainly be considered. And non-specific product labeling such as polymer, elastomeric, and proprietary is definitely not helpful in trying to understand how the material is going to perform with all of the other materials specified. And so our main conclusion, I think, is test early and test often, project-specific materials, conditions that you're in. And keep in mind that materials change. So although we did this study and the results are probably pretty similar to what would happen if we did today, a lot of products change, and the manufacturers never send us a letter. Hey, Sharon, we changed our sealant. You should definitely do another round of testing. We just kind of find this stuff out on the job site. So that's why we want to test early and often. And we gain so much more than the specific results of the test by doing this. As I mentioned before, we had great participation by industry experts from manufacturers, testing labs, and field installers that all contributed materials and knowledge, not only to my training as a newbie, but to our community of resources for Walsh and our instructors as well. At Walsh, we like to share our findings by reaching out to our community of installers and design partners. We held a few seminars of the lessons learned from the study, how it was conducted, as well as in-house training for our field teams to better understand sealants. And here's a good shot of our hands-on demo that we did and some of the test boards in the background. In addition to our field teams, we had spec writers, architects, building enclosure consultants, subcontractors, and manufacturers in attendance. We're all a community. When we were building a project, it's great to gather as a community for sharing knowledge outside of the project specifics as well. And one of the end goals with the sealant study is also to take this knowledge into the field by applying it to every project. So we hold building enclosure coordination for every project, and sealants are a consistent agenda topic. We review the materials and the substrate with each of the installers, as well as the manufacturer installation instructions, most of which all of these steps: clean, prime, back, tool. And we found that early coordinating with the installers to outline the expectations for the project and provide a venue for questions is successful in getting the materials installed correctly. Specific testing typically includes sending the materials to the manufacturer for testing prior to install, and then testing again on site with a test area and/or a mock-up. And our in-field quality control includes recording the materials on site, verifying they are as specified, and then reviewing the install on site as well. And we use a sealant matrix, which really was born out of the study, to record and track the materials and substrates and pull tests for each project. And our guys in the field keep track of this as the project goes on. And of course, on-site pull tests generally conducted by the manufacturer after about 14 days of cure time. We try to test several times throughout the project to ensure both the install and the material are consistent throughout the entire project. So I went over a few of these already, but really what leads to success with sealants, or our success anyways with sealants, is our quality assurance program and the steps that we make sure are implemented on every project, as well as those quality control steps. And I don't know if we are taking questions now or maybe later, but the full sealant study can be accessed on our website at this link. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sharon. That's an excellent presentation. There's a lot of data in there, and I would really encourage anyone who has time to visit your website, because I spent way too long in there, and it's kind of like GBA for me. Like once I go in, it's a wormhole, and you're just lost for hours. So do take the time to do that if you folks haven't already. It's a really great resource. So thank you for the presentation. There are already questions mounting. What we usually do is we'll knock out both presentations and then we'll kind of open it up to a broad discussion. Unless my fellow hosts disagree, I think we'll move to Bill and then do a broad discussion after. Does that work? Fantastic. Thank you. You're up, Bill. What do you got to tell us?
By the way, Sharon, that was awesome. Excellent. A lot of information, and I hope I can gather it all. And I think hopefully I didn't do too much cross-pollination with that. And here we go. And basic, I'm trying not to let Louisiana down any more than what I already have. I appreciate that. So I talk a lot about caulks and sealants, and the reason I do is I'll get to in a minute, but this is what you see when you walk down the aisle at the big box store. And I don't recommend buying stuff from the big box store, but when you do, this is TMI, right? I talk a lot to homeowners about doing this kind of stuff, and they'll call me from the hall or from the aisle and say, what do I do now? And it's like, let's take some pictures. Anyway, the whole issue is there's so many choices, and if you look at the labels on that stuff, it's all done by the marketing department. And so the marketing department's going to put doors and windows or whatever they think is going to be the best product on the label, and that's not always the best way to know it. There we go. Okay, so I want to talk first of all about what got me going. And several years ago, I was a contractor in California, and we did a remodel on they call them double wides or mobile homes, not house trailers. Anyway, it was a double wide, and plan had been put in place. And so it was going to be an EIFS, exterior insulation and finish system. And everything had been bought, the windows had been bought. And at that time, most window manufacturers would not warranty windows that were installed in an EIFS system in residential. And that's because we didn't know how to do it. EIFS is a surface barrier rather than a drainage system. And so I had a chance to meet with some people that had written some commercial books about it and started learning about things like silicone, oxime, acetoxy, and all the differences. It was surprising that the guys that I talked to were commercial, book writing types, and they had never heard of the water-based and the solvent-based sealants. They didn't know what that stuff was. They don't use it. So maybe that's something to think about, right? Anyway, so I'm looking at 5 basic types. There's water-based and solvent-based. And those two, I look at them as they cure by evaporation. And I use the term cure rather than dry. I think that makes more sense, right? So they cure by evaporation, which means they'll shrink on application, and that's a big deal. Now, what I've noticed as I look at the tech sheets, now they have started adding more solids, but that solid is calcium carbonate, which is something else. Anyway, the first 2 are water-based and solvent-based, cure by evaporation. The other 3 that I'm looking at, and my list is a little bit different than Sharon's, but I've covered most of the stuff. Polyurethanes, silicones, and cilial terminated polyethers. That's going to be on the test, Travis. Cilial terminated polyether, right? Or STPE, if you like. All right, anyway, they all cure by exposure to moisture in the air, and they pretty much stay 100% solids. And I like those, and I'll cut to the chase and go back to it again. My caulk or sealant of choice now are the STPEs. I like those the best. They really work in most cases, right? Okay, so one of the things that I want to advocate for is, take Sharon's list and some of the things that I've thrown out there, and when you're selecting caulks and sealants, actually look at the data sheets. They'll tell you some of the stuff that's in there. Sometimes they'll tell you the solids. Sometimes they'll tell you the warnings. Sometimes they'll tell you the Prop 65 thing in California that causes cancer. It's worth doing it. I suggest you select a certain list of caulks and sealants and use those all the time, every time. That makes it simple. Walsh has done an extensive test on that. I suggest you do maybe tests that work for you. But anyway, so here is some of the stuff that we look at. This is an acrylic latex. Tells about tooling time. I think one of the things I want to point out here, the filler here, is calcium carbonate. Solids, 7.8%. 7.8, yeah, right. 78%. So that means it's going to shrink to 78% of its applied size. Now, where that makes a difference is, like, I know a group here in New Orleans one time that was doing some weather sealing, weather testing. And so they went out and bought a case of acrylic latex, painter's caulk, and caulked the whole thing, and they tested out what they wanted. I forgot what the air changes per hour were, but they tested out, and they went back a week later and tested again, and they'd lost their test. And it's my speculation that, first of all, they didn't have a proper caulk bead size, but also the fact that it shrunk. So you need to make sure you're using the right kinds of products for all that. But it talks about a lot of stuff here. And then here's the emergency overview. If it says causes skin cancer or skin irritation or could cause cancer, that might be something to think about. Maybe then you don't want to use your finger to tool it, right? There's some stuff in there to think about. So let's start out with a painter's caulk. So this is a 25-year painter's caulk. And what's cool about that is if you save the tube and if you save the receipt and the caulk fails, you can get your money back. So what I recommend that you do is buy expensive caulk, so at least you can get more money back. The point is, don't buy stuff for warranty, buy it by performance and what you know is going to work. So the painter's, well, we just lost something. Painter's caulk. I'm going to have to pick that up. I'll be right back. Don't go away.
I think Bill spilled his case of sealants.
Sorry about that. I got too excited. I was jumping around. Okay. All right. So the painter's caulk is a good way to go if you're doing on the inside. And that's fine to do those joints in between casing and trim, I guess. Although every time I do that, I think of that old thing about caulk and paint. Caulk and paint makes a carpenter what he ain't. And I'm not sure if that's very, very cool. And I know that there's a lot of people that don't like caulks, and I didn't get a chance to look in the comments, but I have a feeling that there was a lot of shade thrown on my favorite stuff, right? Okay, so we're going to, that was the water base, and so that, or water-based water cleanup. The next one I'm going to talk about is the solvent-based stuff. And here's the Lexel product, and everybody used that at some point in time, or there's a lot of other solvent ones. I really like this stuff because it's sticky, sticky, sticky. Interesting stuff. This clear, because it's clear, and somehow when they wrote the specs, they were able to get in there and make that a non-regulated product, and it could come in the 11-ounce tubes. There's a company out of Chicago called Solar Seal that made a 19-ounce tube, and so they got around this VOC thing. And so sometimes some stuff gets done that's kind of tricky. The Lexel is great, and the other solvent-based stuff is excellent. I really like it a lot. The thing is, I would never, ever, ever use it inside, because oftentimes there's VOCs or some of those other magical things in there that can cause some respiratory problems or odors. So that's good outside, you know. And what's nice about that, a lot of the other stuff like from OSI or some of the other companies, they can color match it, and they can have 500 different color matches. That's a big deal if you're doing siding, although you should never caulk the field or butt joints in siding, but that's another story, right? Okay, so let's go to the polyurethanes. This is pretty common. Most contractors I talk to, this is the one they use, and everybody's real happy about using that. And I, once again, share what I like different about it. The polyurethanes are fine. I think one of the things about polyurethanes is outside, I think they can be susceptible to UV. And so while they're a good sealant, and if you've got a case of it, I say go ahead and use it up, but let's talk about buying something else in the future. Now we got the silicones, and there's two basic kinds of silicones. There's the oxime and the acetoxy. And basically what I'm going to say is the acetoxy is what you find at the big box stores, and it smells like vinegar. And the thing about that is there are some building materials that say do not use the acetoxy with it, because whatever chemicals in there will actually cause some deterioration or degradation of aluminum and other products. So be thoughtful about what caulk and sealant you're using. For me, the only time I'm going to use silicone is in a wet area, or we use some resource conservation technology silicone bulbs that we use the silicone. The rest of the time, I don't use it. And just remember, silicone is a noun, not a verb. A lot of people say they're going to go silicone a joint. No, what are you going to put on it? Anyway, enough said. So, okay, now we get to my stuff. Tight Bond 3, we all carpenters and everybody I think knows what Tight Bond stuff is. But Tight Bond is a chemical company, and this product, their ultimate, ultimate mil MP sealant. This particular one is clear, but they come in a lot of different colors. This stuff has really got some good adhesion in it. This is one of those cilial terminated polyethers, or whatever they're calling it, MS polymers. And so this is one that I like a lot. I use some different caulks and sealants to try to join together some Aridus porch board to use as thresholds. And Aridus is a composite kind of a product. And I used some Tight Bond and some other stuff, and I glued it together, clamped it for 24 hours, pulled it apart, and I didn't put a video in on that. But then I put it on the edge of a table and beat it with a mallet, and I could not beat it apart. I could not break it. That seal in 24 hours was strong enough to hold those products, those composite products together. So this is good stuff. Dries on exposure to moisture in the air. It's a mixture, I believe, of polyurethanes and silicones and all this other kind of stuff. Anyway, this is what I like a lot. And we use a ton of this, which is also an STPE. I think Sharon mentioned some of that with fluid or liquid applied stuff in her talk. We use this stuff in brick, like in brick seals in old brick buildings where we've got real rough sills and I want to make some sort of a panning system. Stuff is easy to apply. It's real waterproof, and its adhesion is amazing. So when you're selecting sealants, though, you want to look for some stuff, because so how do we know if a caulk is a water-based? Well, usually it says keep from freezing. That's how we know it's going to be a water-based product, and it's easy to clean up with water. A solvent-based one usually says keep from flames. Oftentimes the VOCs are high, although sometimes they have chemically been able to, as I understand it, trap the volatile organic compounds in some of these products. So even though they may have a high inbred or, a high content of volatile organic compounds, they don't come out because of the magic they put in them. Now, of course, you want to look and see what the VOCs are. Is it paintable? And one of the things I like to refer to that is I used to teach a class up in Baton Rouge for weatherization contractors in Louisiana. My whole thing is silicone caulk's not paintable. Sure enough, there's somebody in the audience out there goes out and gets some and says, look, on the label, it says it's paintable. Well, who did the label, right? The marketing department, right? See what Sharon has to say about that. And then the date. It's really important to look at the dates. I do have a lot of tubes of the Dow 795 caulk down in my shop that's out of date, and I just can't use it, and it kind of hurts my heart, but I'll get over it. And also, what do you clean it up with? And, if you can clean it up with water or mineral spirits, or sometimes they say don't, let it cure and cut it loose. But so those are some of the things that you can look for when you're selecting a caulk and sealant, because the labels that you get from off the shelf, first of all, with these old eyes, I can't read the labels anyway, but go ahead and get the text sheets and have them. You're supposed to have the MSDS sheets on the job site anyway, as I understand it. Okay, so tools and accessories. So this is the best tool for tooling joints, right? It's a spoon, better than licking your finger. Anyway, if you look at the shape of the spoon, the spoon's got, a pretty nice rounded profile here or fatter here, and that actually works pretty good for tooling joints. Or you can go out and spend real money and get some of these spatulas. This is from a company called Abound. And this is different ways to tool it. Now, I'm sure most people just are going to continue tooling with their fingers, but I'm going to advocate for the fact that, do you know what's in that caulk? And is some of that material in that caulk going to transfer into your skin and cause you, who knows what, right? Okay, and then Baccarod. Some places, if you go into the big box stores, they might call that joint filler or whatever, but Baccarod comes in all different sizes. And the Baccarod is an important component in good, long-lasting, durable caulk joints. So this video here, I had posted this on Instagram, but you see how thin, let's go. You see how thin that bead is? Now, of course, this is done in my shop, and I'm hoping your buildings don't move that much, but look how thin that is and how well it's still holding together. So in the center of it is going to be cohesion, how it sticks together, and the two sides are adhesion. That's just an example of how it works, and I think I'm impressed. I am. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about cohesion and adhesion and three-sided joint contacts. And so you want to use Baccarods, and I call this joint right here, I call that a field joint, because I think the other word, the butt joint, I don't care for that. Anyway, Baccarod. We got our caulk bead this in an hourglass shape, so we got lots of adhesion here sticking to the substrate and cohesion in the middle so it sticks to itself. So I think that a lot of people know that, but what people don't think about a lot is in these fillet beads, which is a real common bead where siding might run into trim, and we typically put that bead in there and fill it. That's why it's called a fillet, right? Anyway, the whole idea there, if you really want a long-lasting caulk joint, there should be some sort of a bond breaker tape in there, and I noticed Sharon talked about that a little bit too. Anyway, that way you got your adhesion here and here, because if you think about it, if you've got a caulk joint, a caulk that has a 50% expansion capacity, and your caulk bead is a 1/16 of an inch, do the math for me here, Travis. How much expansion and contraction can I get, right? You don't have to do the math. I don't want to put you under pressure, right? Okay, but anyway, the point is that if we've got three-sided, here I'm pointing at my screen, you can see me point, right? If we got three-sided adhesion, that ability has been cut down significantly. So we want to think about that. And let's talk about caulk guns. This company, and Irion, I think is the name of them, and they've just popped up on Instagram. Instagram is the whole world now, right? Anyway, this is the caulk gun that has an anti-drip feature in it, which is great. And that's for sausage tubes. And we've used that the other day, and I really like it. It's pretty cool. And they have another one here. First of all, one of my other favorite caulks is ChemLink Duralink 35. And that is an STPE as well. We can buy that from a local supplier, not a big box store, but a supplier for like $4.25 a tube, which is really a good price. And I would say if you can get that stuff, and I'm not selling it, I like it. But this gun that we have here, you see that little knob right there, we can adjust this to a real thick caulk or a real thin caulk, because usually you end up with two caulk guns, right? This one gives you a single caulk gun. The only thing about these caulk guns is so pretty. I hate to use them, but we're going to do it. All right. So this just shows us using that nice caulk gun with some. Now listen to that. We can even hear the music. We've got the music going on. So we're using some Prosoco Fast Flash here. That's AZEK that we're gluing onto this wall for some sort of a drip edge, because the water was draining over the side and it wasn't working very well. A little Spanish lesson there for you. Anyway, so we're using that right there. So I want to show you where we put that. You see this whole edge of this deck. You can see where it was dripping over the edge. They had no drip edge, no flashing on the edge. And I posted on some Instagram some stuff about how we figured out how to do that. And actually a kick out drip edge really makes a big difference, and it works, right? So we were able to just use that Prosoco Fast Flash and put a bead on the back side of that AZEK and just push it on, pull it off to get it stringy, push it on again, and just hold it for a few seconds, and it's stuck. And so the adhesion is really good. So that's another component of these caulks and sealants. That also will help to serve water from getting behind the AZEK up there for the drip edge. All right, so I want to make my pitch here too. Is about I have been inspired by the crew that does this building science and beer, or BS and beer, that I'm going to start doing one building science in the hot human. We're going to call it building science red beans and rice. All I need to do is get the resources and the horsepower to put it all together. But I am convinced that y'all up there, Travis, you're kind of close enough, but most of you up there in those heating climates, it's different. Everything's backwards, right? All right. So that's me. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Excellent work, as always. Familiar videos from Instagram there. I love that sealant stretch. And that's, before we go too far down the line, I'm sure everyone has a long list of questions that they've been amassing from Sharon's presentation on down the line. But I do think that that's sort of the compelling visual that, to me, gives sealants value, is that elongation across a gap. And I know that, yes, our structure shouldn't move that much, but they do move some. The Earth's always moving. It's always moving. So we're solving that problem with a product frequently that is not challenged anywhere near to its chemical capacity, but understanding the compatibility and the proper application of that is key. So I really appreciate your thorough presentations to move us along the way. I'm not sure where to start. Going back to Sharon's presentation, I really love that you addressed the actual field conditions in that. I think so often that's lost in the data that's presented to us. Is, this is our reliable testing. That's why they call it ASTM, another stupid testing method, because it doesn't usually reflect how we actually use the product. So I really appreciate that as being a field guy. And certainly the takeaway for me has always been you really are going to benefit from staying within a system. I know brand loyalty can be problematic, especially, as you said, since they don't send you an email update to let you know about the new chemistry. But I definitely think that is kind of a shortcut to not having those compatibility issues. But I don't know. I don't want to hijack the conversation. I know there was a lot of great questions in the chat. Really early on, there was one from Todd that I wanted to write down, but I can't write that fast. So if any of my co-hosts want to hop in with the hot ticket questions, dive in.
I've got a question. Oh, actually, I've got 2 pages of questions, but one, I'm interested in Sharon's lists or charts of compatibilities. I was trying to absorb as you flip through. Just there's a lot of good information, and I love geeking out on which chemical is good for what. I did get the sense from your adhesion matrix that you found STPEs were maybe not good at either adhesion or cohesion. I'm not sure which. And then Bill's saying he loves STPEs, or essentially, I'm putting the word love in his mouth, I think. But so what's the deal? Why are STPs good or bad? I'm still in 1980s mode where we chose from latex or silicone. Those were the options. So I'm still trying to understand the fine points of all these. So why are STPs good or bad? Do they stick well or not?
Yeah, no, STPEs actually are great, and we use those quite a bit in a lot of our built projects, and they really combine kind of the best performance aspects of a silicone and a polyurethane. And silicones, you're getting kind of a longer life in terms of durability with exposed conditions. But polyurethanes will typically stick a little bit better to most substrates. And I say most, I guess, with a little asterisk or quotes, because we still use a lot of mechanically attached WRBs, and those have typically a kind of a waxy surface. I mean, they're supposed to be repelling weather and everything. So they do a really good job of repelling sealants as well. So we have to be careful with that. But STPEs used as like a cladding seal is great. I mean, and yes, we take warranties with kind of a grain of salt as well. I agree, Bill. Where silicones have a 20-year warranty, STPEs typically have a 10-year warranty. They do have a lot of exposure testing to back that up, and it gives us a good kind of comparison. But and here, at least, we're looking at repainting every 7 to 10 years or sooner. And so that's when a lot of those sealants are going to be redone anyways. And STPEs can be painted. And so whereas Bill mentioned that silicones, I know Dow always tells us don't paint them because, I mean, they can be painted. You can physically put paint on top of them, but it will peel off and crack and craze and not look great. With STPEs, you can definitely paint over them. The movement capability of an STP is typically more than paint, so you may get a little cracking. But in general, we get a good result out of that. So I would say STPEs are great, and a lot of our liquid applied membranes are also STPEs. So we get, where cladding seals come into contact with our weather barrier at times, or interior air seal materials, we get a lot of good compatibility with using the same chemistry there too.
Okay, thanks. Any additional thoughts on that, Bill?
Well, I think that what gets down to it, I think that Sharon's given us a kind of good model for that, is when you're doing this, you should test your materials. I know several years ago, I was working with a lot of vinyl coil stock, doing about seal pans and stuff like that, and to try to find out what sealants would stick to it best. And I finally found, when I was making the upturned end dams in the vinyl coil stock, and I know this isn't what you asked, but I found that the PVC glue worked the best, but I was trying to find a caulk that worked well. And interestingly enough, the tight bond STPE had the most adhesion to vinyl of all of them. Now, how long it's going to stay adhered, I can't tell you, but let's test it. Let's just test it. Pick what you're doing, test it.
Excellent. And just a quick question: is there a difference between sealants and caulks? Are they totally totally synonymous, or are there subtle differences between a caulk and a sealant?
I would say if you want to be taken seriously, please call it a sealant.
Okay.
That goes for salespeople too.
I thought this was kind of an interesting question from one of the audience members. In your area where there's seismic concern or activity, does that affect the choice of sealants?
Not really. I guess it would. if you were looking at a structural sealant to hold glazing in, doing affordable housing, we don't really have non-frame curtain wall systems going on. So I would say if it's in a structural capacity, yes, but when you're in a seismic area, the concern with that is to get out alive, not to maintain your weather control layers.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. Now, Mike Gerton had a good question. That instructions usually say do not tool after application. So why not? Is that realistic? Are there actually problems? What's the story with tooling after application?
Yeah. So tooling an application is something that I learned from Dave Kimball. He used to work for Dow for a long time and now works for Prosoco, and he has a term that he calls intimate contact, and you want to make sure that your sealant has intimate contact with the substrate, or else it's not going to bond properly. So sealants that say not to tool, it's a little suspicious, I guess. I think it's more of an aesthetic thing that leads people to say not to tool, but honestly, I'm not quite sure. I have run into a few installers that are kind of set on not tooling, and we have to go over this with them. But it usually comes down to them being concerned that once they tool it, it's going to look smooth and shiny and it'll look different than the siding. And our concern is more about keeping water out or air in and air out than aesthetics.
That makes sense. A question back to your testing, Sharon, or just part of the impetus for this show was Peter Yost and Dave Gauthier were on talking about their wing nut testing, which is their sort of their non-ASTM testing to replicate actual conditions on the site, which I think you did well, or your testing would qualify as wing nut testing. So, but somebody, June was asking if temperature affected the test results. I know you said that it was sort of in an open warehouse, so it wasn't like it was totally climate controlled, but I mean, most carpenters, at least here in the north, we're usually working at least on the edges of manufacturer suggestions, if not totally beyond it. And now that we're like anywhere from 120 degrees in some parts of the country to negative 40 in the north, like how do site conditions affect ideal performance? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, for sure. So in the data sheets, it usually says 70 degrees, 50% humidity. In the Pacific Northwest, the majority of the year, we are probably more around 40 degrees and raining. Although today we're at 88 and I think 20% humidity. So our range isn't really that big in terms, if you're looking at the Midwest or far north climates or far south climates like you, Bill, you're looking at a much different range. For us, within our range, what we really see is as the temperatures drop, most sealants are harder to apply and tool, and they take longer to set up. When it's hot outside, we tend to not have the humidity, but they'll usually cure faster, and so they'll set up faster. So depending on, it really just more affects our installation schedule. If we are looking at applying, we just need to be quicker with it, or apply in smaller areas so that it can be handled with tooling a little easier. So it really doesn't range too much. I would assume that if you get into more extreme locations, you may get some kind of more odd interactions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you.
I had a little side thing going here in the chat between John McComb and Bill talking about the tooling of the joints and the size of the joints for efficacy. And I think it's worth mentioning, for these sealant joints to be effective, there is a desired minimum. You said, what, a 1/4 inch, Bill?
I like to, in most cases, recommend 1/4 of an inch. I was just at a job site earlier on with some stucco and some stucco ground, stucco mold, and I like 1/4 inch. Anderson window likes 1/4 inch gap around their windows in the casing. So, yeah.
Okay. I guess I use sealants a lot and have seen really, I have not seen failures in sealant application behind a flange that is also then taped. A window installed in an opening with sealant behind the flange and then taped over. I don't know how much the sealant is getting challenged in that application because of the tape, but I know that in terms of that application, the other place that I use sealants a ton is for an air barrier at the inside of a window installation with backer rod and then sealant over that joint. I've not had air infiltration as a result of that sealant assembly there. So I guess I'm more concerned in terms of at the back of the flange, we smush the hell out of that sealant there. So instead of having that 1/4 inch bead that would be nice and fat and robust and give you all that space for adhesion to occur, when we smash it down, now we're challenging that cohesion that you were talking about. Am I right about that?
Well, I'm going to pick on that a little bit. I've done a lot of window installation stuff and training, and actually installed a few windows too. And the whole issue here is there's a debate if do we need to, because the ASTM E2112 calls for a 3/8 inch nominal bead behind the backside of the mounting flange covering the pre-punched holes. And some people argue you don't need it because if you're flashing, if you're doing some regular flashing on the jambs and the heads, then I think you're good. But touching what you talked about, Travis, is the real place, after some stuff I've been involved with, the real place where we keep the air and the water out is on the inside. And so that's where I want that. That's where that 1/4 inch gap becomes a real deal. That other bit on the outside is a warranty thing. And you know how I feel about warranties.
Yeah, I guess it's everything in buildings, belt and suspenders, and then second belt and third set of suspenders. And, I definitely think that we challenge these joints a lot less than we think we do when we do the rest of our job right, working outwards, especially with the push for rain screens and all the other things that we've done with WRB. I feel very confident in the assemblies that we've put forth. So I guess, I don't want to pick at nits, as they say. I guess we can move on to other areas that are more challenging. I know people have been doing air sealing work with caulks. I know I do a fair amount of that, at penetrations, and it's easier to get that larger gap there. But then you run into problems of, so many of our homes are built with, OSB sheathing, and a lot of times your trades aren't punching those holes with, precision tools that make a really nice smooth edge for you to apply that sealant to. So then I guess there would be some value in knowing the right product for the right application on those things. And I was grateful that you brought up the AirDam product, or Proska's Fast Flash product, because I think that has a lot of applications in air sealing as well.
A few people have commented on the embodied energy, just sort of generally. And then somebody was asking about the end of life in terms of sealants. Is there anything that can contribute to that bigger concept idea?
Go, Sharon.
I was surprised to see it. I was surprised to see that question, but it came up from a couple of people, so I thought I should.
So the question is what is an expected end of life, or when? I think
that would be a good way to approach it, maybe.
Yeah, I would take a look at the history and the testing. They have a lot of accelerated testing for different sealants, but also what's kind of cool is the testing we did in 2013 is now 7 years old, and we still have some of these test boards where sealants are still hanging up there, and so we can kind of see them. So I would just say, go look around. There's a lot of sealants that are on buildings that are failing, and you can go around and see them. And polyurethanes tend to get a little more dried out quicker than silicones. Silicones, though, too, there used to be a lot of two-part silicones that start to revert and they get really sticky after a while. So yeah, do those walks, take some pictures, and talk to a chemist if you find one with a manufacturer. It's pretty interesting to see that. In general, I would say silicones you know, and we're not talking like bathroom silicones, but more, you know, a Dow or a Tremco silicone. They're going to have accelerated testing, and they've been around for a long time. Polyurethanes generally tend to have a little bit less of a life, but there's a lot of those that are around too, you know, especially if they haven't been exposed to a lot of UV. STPEs, I think, have been on the market for probably, and Billy might know this better, I think ChemLeak was one of the first ones, maybe in BASF, so that was probably 20, 25 years ago. So some of those are still going strong, but I mean, if somebody comes up with a 50-year STPE, I would call BS and beer on that one, because I don't think they've been around for that long.
Doug's had a bunch of good questions, but one was any differences in adhesion to different surfaces with different silicones? Are different silicones good for different things?
Yeah, I saw that one in the chat. That was pretty exciting, actually. So during our sealant tests, so Atlas Supply and Randy McAdams, they're actually the Dow dealer. Not that we focused on Dow silicones. We had our Tremco rep bring us in a huge supply of their silicones as well. But it was pretty interesting. We put their sealants on everything, things that weren't recommended. And one thing that fell off the wall was Dow 790 to Tyvek. And it wasn't unexpected, but we had an installer come in when we were applying it, and he diligently came back about a week and a half later to see how it was going. And you know, we picked up the test board and one of the beads fell off, and he just went white, you know. So yeah, definitely different adhesion for different sealants. And a lot of times how Dow explains it, they have a 790 and then 795 are structural sealants, and those formulas don't change over time, or you know, to a certain extent anyways, because they have to go through structural testing in order to change those sealants. They have very particular substrates for them. If you look in the data sheet, Dow 790 is typically to porous substrates, and 795 is to a non-porous substrates. So if you switch those around, you'll see a lot of situations that don't work. 795 is kind of a stiffer sealant, and so if you put that on a brick or something that just doesn't have that great of a surface to adhere to, it won't have enough give to actually adhere. And so, yeah, it's great to learn those things and kind of play around, because when you're reviewing a specification, and you know, if the specification says 795 for your mason, you might say, hey, wait a second, you know. So yeah, definitely a lot of different performance on those.
Do you the most intense sealant I've used is 3M 5200. It's a marine adhesive sealant. Do you have any idea what it is? Have you guys ever used it? It's super sticky. I've only seen it in coastal communities where they build and repair boats. So like, it seems like it's a product that boat builders know about, and it's just I haven't seen anything like it on the residential construction end.
Be in the tech sheet, Mike.
Yeah, I will. I was just hoping you guys would know. June had a good question earlier. Bill mentions 78% solids. Do the solids have to do with shrinkage or durability, or what is the significance of the solids content?
Well, for me, you know, a lot of that is calcium carbonate, which is just kind of a filler. You know, even 100% silicone ain't 100% silicone. And so it's some kind of a filler. And once again, it's in the tech sheets. And I confess, I don't really read all the tech sheets. My biggest concern is solids content and VOCs, or, you know, or how we're going to clean it up. Because I want a joint that I've made. I don't know why I'm thinking what I'm thinking right now, but I miss California, right? Anyway, I think I just want to know if it's going to shrink or not. That's my biggest thing, and how durable it is. I know some of these magical STPEs have great adhesion. And another thing about that too, solids content, one of the stickiest stuff is the solvent-based things with the terpolymers and all that other chemistry that's in there. They're really sticky. But to me, it's solids just how much it's going to shrink.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's really what we found in our study too. There were some sealants that were, frankly, just more stinky, and they had a lot of solvents in them. And a lot of those, they didn't really have their chemistry listed on the product data sheet. You can go to the safety data sheet and get a little bit better idea of what's going on. And in general, we found those ones that weren't defined in terms of their chemistry were either a third-party label, a manufacturer is buying it from someone else and they don't want to admit it, and then, or they're really highly solvinated, and those are the ones that we saw shrink. So we just found a trend that if they're stinky and off-gassing, that's that solvent coming out, and then they would shrink. So I think that probably has something to do with what Bill's saying too in terms of the solid content.
Yeah. And one of the things in the solvents stuff, there's toluene and things, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with toluene, but it's a pretty heavy duty product, solvent or whatever it is, and it's toxic and makes people sick, and there it goes again. Don't go away.
Yeah, well, that kind of leads into Allison's quick question was, is there a difference between sealants and adhesives? I would assume that maybe adhesives tend to be higher VOC because you're not relying on it to be flexible. You want it to just be sticky. Would that be true, or is that just a wild theory?
I'm frankly not sure. I think if something is labeled as an adhesive, that it might not have the testing in terms of full joint dimension, and I bet the performance characteristics or the performance qualities in testing is probably different from a sealant from just an adhesive.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I just call them caulk, sealants, and adhesives, and then let it go at that. Just keep
all lumped together. Bill, you mentioned you use silicone in wet areas. I'm thinking that we want sealants in like, aren't we using sealants if we're not using it for air sealing? Aren't we using it to resist water? So wouldn't any sealant be in a wet area, or is there a fine line there, and why silicone for wet areas?
It's the way we've always done it, Mike. No, it's just what I'm used to. I think that if you look at, I think that the silicones have a tendency, like Sharon has said, to be more durable, last longer. And I think they have good adhesion, and whatever the chemistry is in there, they stick really well. I think obviously the downside, and I'm thinking about tubs and toilets and things, I think the downside to all that is if you've ever taken the silicone caulk out from around your tub and then try to put it back, it's really hard. You've got to put silicone, the new silicone, in a fresh substrate, because it won't stick to the other. It won't stick to the old, whatever the magic has happened in there. It won't stick. So it's just the way we've always done it.
Is there any silicon in silicone? I looked it up once and I forget the answer.
Oh, that's yours, Sharon.
Oh, you know what? I do not know the answer to that.
I think the answer is that silicone is a completely made up word. It doesn't actually relate to anything, but that's going way back in the memory.
Sharon, you mentioned that the study that you conducted was done 7 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, 2013.
So, how often is that something that should be done? How much do things change? I was reading something that Brian wrote in 2000 and let's see, what was it, 4? And he said, "Oh, that's all different now. Everything's changed." So, how often does it make sense to do this kind of testing?
Well, yeah, often. I mean, and what we do instead of doing that large scale of the test, that was really kind of an initiation process for me being new. But we test the project specific sealants on every project. And I saw a post or a chat post that somebody asked, you know, if they don't tell you if things change, how do you know when they do change? And so we test at the beginning of the project, but we also test as the project goes along. And I think the typical specification will say test, you know, 10 sealant joints in the first 1,000 square or linear feet of sealant. And so we always try to make that a little bit more project specific if our designers are willing to play ball on that. And what we kind of like to do instead is test maybe 2 sealant to substrate combinations on every single elevation of the building. And that just follows our sequence, in that we're typically doing the cladding install and the WRV install one elevation at a time. So that would kind of follow our sequence and installer and that we're getting on site. We have had things change in the middle of a project. We had some sealants not stick to a cladding trim piece. And if we hadn't done sealant tests, we wouldn't have known. And what had happened, it actually wasn't the sealant, it was the primer on the pre-primed trim that had changed. And we didn't know until we had done the test, and then we, you know, hounded everybody, what changed, what should we do? And we ended up being able to solve the problem with the primer. But yeah, things do change in the middle of the project sometimes.
Several years ago, a major window manufacturer, the company that was providing their wood sealer changed the formulation, and they had huge wood component failures. And the manufacturer that with PPG was the manufacturer that was making the paint coating or the sealant, and it didn't tell the wood company, and they really got hurt really badly. So you got to pay attention, you know, how things change. And, you know, we want to set it and go, but sometimes we have to stop and test it. I don't know that in the world I live in that we would test on every job, but certainly test on a regular basis, you know.
Yeah, testing in the field, at least at the residential level that I work at, is extremely limited. I think that's why I was so grateful to find your stuff online, Sharon. Like, oh, this is great. I don't have to do this testing now. I'm sure that Pete Yost would be very disappointed to hear me say that. But the fact of the matter is that most guys who do what I do are kind of doing what they're used to, unless someone comes to the party with something new and exciting, as Bill's picture from the box store aisle was well placed. I feel like one of the nice things about Instagram is you got guys like, you know, Steve Basic putting up stuff, or Jake Bruton, or some of these guys that have really done some of the things that you're talking about. And it's a little bit of a leap ahead. The problem that I run into is that we're so trained against failure that we don't, at least me, I don't look at the VOCs, and I'm not worried about the off-gassing. I use the hell out of some solvent-based adhesives because that's a very reliable product. I use the one that you showed in your presentation, Bill, that Lexel. That thing, if you've ever had to remove that stuff, that'll sell you on it. You don't ever have to buy a tube. Just have to go take out somebody's vanity that used that product to put that stuff in there, because you can't get the damn stuff off. It is extremely tenacious in its bond. So I think that it's those types of experiences that lead the field decisions so often for guys that are doing what I'm doing, that I guess I've kind of run my course there, but there's something to that.
Yeah, I think it would be great if there was some kind of chart that took all of Bill's knowledge and, decompress that. Not that you'd be standing in that aisle, but, as the architect or the builder beforehand, that says, it's like if then that statement. Like, if I have this, then I want what? And it leads to these types of, sealants or caulks or adhesives, and, kind of goes back and forth. And maybe that wouldn't pick up every single scenario, and you should definitely still do some testing or whatever. But like Travis said, I can write stuff in my drawings, and the builder might still just use whatever they are, using because they know it works, unless there's that whole conversation list. Like sometimes we have the conversation like, okay, we've got a homeowner that has, issues with certain VOCs, so we have to be more careful about what we might be using for products and sealants. But It would be great if you took all of the data that you have in your big chart and it was something that's like clickable and easy, to, granted, those of us who are really nerdy will read the charts, but, for the average person, you wonder if some of these things could be solved by simply understanding that, like, this product does not stick to this thing. So don't use it in this application.
Is the matrix that you mentioned, Sharon, is that kind of information included in there?
It is included on the online study. And I was going to add, I came from the architectural world and we were in the field a lot, but we didn't really do any hands-on anything. And I know a lot of architects are very hands-on, so not to say that everyone's not. But doing the sealant study as really kind of an initiation, and my mentor at the time just throwing me in the deep end there, I had never applied sealant anything, and collected materials and applied them. And I'm just here to say, if I can do it, I think anyone can do it. And if you have a garage space or something that's not indoor, right where you're breathing, and especially if you're doing residential construction and maybe you specify a lot of the same products on every project, and you have samples of those likely anyways, it's really not hard. And I hope that the study is somewhat empowering of everybody to go out and do their own sealant test. You really only need about 14 days for a cure time. And there's a lot of off-cut trim, and a window manufacturer is happy to send you a corner sample or a sample of their window frame so you can test sealant. And if you're using a lot of the same substrates on project to project, you only need one, and you can test different sealants over and over. And even if you're just testing every 6 months or once a year and not every project, at least that gets you somewhat ahead. And I think you really do start to amass a knowledge of what works and what doesn't. Because those samples, I can't believe it's already been 7 years that study has gone by. It seems like just last summer I was stuck in this warehouse for hours and hours doing this testing. But pretty soon you'll amass a collection of really cool sealant tests. And then you'll get to see how they perform over years and years.
This is a bit of an obscure question, but I think it's interesting. Carl Seville had asked a while back. Zip system requires. My note says zip system requires a solvent with flex tape with silicone caulk, but not required for polyurethane caulk. I don't know if Carl's still on. If he can clarify that. Do you guys? I think it's a solvent primer if you're using Zips flex tape with silicone but not with polyurethane. Do you guys know about that, or do you know, is there a basic difference with silicone versus polyurethane that would suggest that silicone needs something extra?
I'm not familiar with that, and we don't really have a whole lot of zip system going on out here in the West.
Okay.
Don't know, yeah.
And another question, you talked about ideal joint widths, and I know good practice is to use backer rods. I rarely see backer rods used in residential. I think there needs to be more training on that. But is there an ideal joint depth? Is there an ideal proportion? Is there a way to get an ideal depth without backer rod?
Yeah, definitely. So I think just about every manufacturer, if you comb through their data sheets, and then Dow has a handbook, and then the SWRI is a good resource as well. So sealants should have a 2-to-1 ratio, and so 2 across the width and 1 is right in the middle of the joint to get that hourglass figure. And we always go with 3/8 of an inch because 1/4 inch is the minimum, and we like to build in some tolerances. So we always say at least 3/8 of an inch on our joints, and then you'll see masonry joints are larger, and that's okay. 1/4 inch depth, I think, is typically the minimum, is what a lot of sealant manufacturers want to see. But yeah, there's a lot of guides out there, and that one that I kind of put up on the screen is a little distilled down. We use probably 3 or 4 manufacturers, or we see 3 or 4 manufacturers typically in our specifications, and so that's kind of distilled down from all of them, and it's kind of a quick guide. But yeah, it talks about making sure we use backer rod and the proper backer rod, that it fits in the joint, that it's compressed to the proper size, and yeah, that you're getting that joint dimension is really key to ensuring that the sealant's going to perform as designed.
Right. So a lot of traditional builders I've worked with completely ignore 3/8 or a 1/4 inch. They think a 1/4 inch is way too big, and they'll go, a 0 or 1/16 inch or maybe an 1/8 of an inch. So if we were to say, maybe I could get them to do an 1/8 of an inch, is there a way to make a sealant work at an 1/8 of an inch, or is that just is an 1/8 of an inch essentially nothing? Like just forget the sealant altogether.
I would say you might want to look at a tape.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, and I think the issue is, if you look at it, and I think I mentioned it earlier, that if you look at how much a sealant is meant to expand or contract, then you can do the math. You do a smaller joint. I mean, fiber cement's a classic example. When they first came out with that stuff, it was, you had it nominally touching or a small gap, which my tape measure doesn't show the nominally touching measurement on it. But the point was people would take some sort of a sealant and smooge it down on the joint from the outside. And first of all, it made like a snowplow track on the outside with a shiny, glossy, ugly look. But those joints failed more often than not, And so I think that small joint is, and it's tough. There's another siding product, LP Smart Side, I like a lot, and they want big joints in that because it is an engineered wood product, and it has greater movement, and the joints are bigger. And so a lot of people don't like them. It's stucco, people want to put stucco right down on the deck or right on the, anyway, I'll get started and I'll stop. Need to have joints for expansion, for materials, and for drainage and all that other stuff.
I had a chemist describe to me one time, I thought it was a good visual representation. I was kind of looking around for a rubber band, but if you were to take a rubber band and fold it in half and be kind of stretching it across, it has a certain amount of elasticity. And if you had full of rubber bands and doing that, like you're really, it's going to easily, and it'll either or break in the middle. Conversely, if you're holding rubber bands super close together, you're not going to be able to stretch it at all. So it's going to be more likely to fail. And so I think that's where a lot of that joint dimension comes from, is for proper movement, and that's going to align with the manufacturer's testing. So if you're not installing it to the proper dimension and proportion, then you're not going to get the performance qualities that you've signed up for and that your design team has specified.
I feel like we see those larger joints more in the commercial world than the residential world because, and this could be totally wrong, my opinion is that commercial buildings are looked at from far away. Typically you appreciate the large building in mass, the huge glass curtain walls. Typically the client is not walking up and inspecting that joint size around the window. But I have clients on windows that I've installed who have come up and been like, boy, this kind of a wide joint here. And you just smoosh some stuff in there, like, oh no, that's way better than the small gap. It's a hard sell for most residential clients though, because their experience is interior trims. They're looking at the casing joint above the door that opens up seasonally because you trimmed it perfectly and there's no gap. Of course, if you trimmed it perfectly, you'd bond those together, but that doesn't help with our sealant conversation. So you get what I'm saying though. These smaller joints are a hard sell to the sealant manufacturers, but they're opposite. The large joint is a really hard sell to the client, and the client's the one who pays. So that's why we're getting the small joints, and I guess that's the problem, eh?
Well, the bigger joint allows the building to breathe,
Oh no, Bill!
Oh, he didn't. No. But that actually, that leads into, or 3 minutes for the end. So we have to do all of our ending statements. I don't know who's in charge of end game tonight.
I don't know if we made that plan.
Yep. I think we go around the horn and everybody has parting thoughts,
Oh,
but I
parting
feel really
thoughts.
bad asking about Todd's question and then not getting around to it. He mentioned early on about the expectation of the sealants for the 100-year and 200-year houses that we're trying to build and design in these conversations. Is it realistic to expect a sealant to perform for that duration? I guess it depends on the application, but our guest experts weigh in, and is that a lost cause? Just give up?
I'll let you go first.
We don't,
Go, Sharon. Tell them.
Well, if we've stumped the panelists, I guess we'll do parting thoughts instead. I think we can realistically say that while we aspire to design the 100-year home, it's all systems. And so if you protect that joint with other things and it's a redundant system, then maybe we can expect that. And hopefully that answered Todd's question from the beginning that I really wanted to get back to. Thanks, Todd.
So I have a thought now. Now I have a thought, right?
Yes.
Which is that I think that the rate of building performance changing, air changes per hour, new products, new processes is going so fast that we're headed for a crash. I mean by a crash, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. I mean, down here, my pitch is that while it's passive house is great, and I learn a lot from passive house, I'm not sure we figured out how to do 16-inch on center framing yet here where I am. So I think that we got to expect we're going to make a lot of mistakes. Get your insurance paid up.
I'm sure that there's a sealant out there that has a proven life history of 100 years, but I don't know what it is personally. I would say if you're working on a residential construction where high craft and not production building is a thing, and you don't plan on painting your building with all materials that are going to last for 100 years, use design to eliminate sealant joints. I think if you, on the cladding level and on the air barrier level, I think you have a better chance because they're not exposed. If you can keep them from the elements that degrade sealants, I think you have a better chance of them lasting a long time.
thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. It's much appreciated.
Yes, thank you both, and thanks to the audience for joining in. And
Excellent. Thanks
Thanks
again.
for having me. I appreciate being here.
See some of you next week.
See you all next week. Thanks again.
See you next week.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night, all.